Hey
Hi,
there.
Phil.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, good. Still busy with lots of things, nonstop.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wait and see who
And,
joins.
and I have a quick question. I think you just set out that survey about the fruit packaging tool.
Yeah,
What do you mean by having it showcased on the wiki? Just kind of a link to the GitHub?
yeah, just a link to the GitHub.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'll explain that. Yeah, I mean, when I talked to Brian Asmus about it, he said he wanted to make sure that the
Mm,
work stream members voted on whether to include it there or not. Because I mean,
okay.
it's sitting out on GitHub publicly there. It's kind of I'm working through the official contribution channels. So to a certain extent, we may have jumped the gun by putting it up there before going through that, but I didn't know what they've actually changed the contribution, procedure, and they talked about it at the summit on the first day, and so the contribution channels, and I mean the procedure has changed. They've got some whole new thing. So that's why I'm kind of, I mean, yeah, it's out on GitHub, sort of on the OCP GitHub, but it's like, okay, it's not really recognized as an HP contribution yet, though. It's
Yeah. And then I think it's easy
in a
for
limbo
stuff to kind
state.
of wind up there, then people aren't
Right.
checking the GitHub on a regular basis. They're checking the wiki. And if you can post something on
Right.
GitHub and it's like,
It
I mean, yeah, it's,
it falls
I
through the
think,
cracks. It's
yeah,
just in a
exactly.
limbo state. So I'm working through that, and one of the, you know, apps to go through is having a vote, but even without being on the MHS wiki, I still have to go through this whole process. And like you presented the white paper in the server, um, you know, project. I may have to do the same in the server project or just the MHS, and that's what I'm trying to nail down. Is it does it count if I just go and present it in the MHS, monthly public meeting, or do I have to do server as well? So it's a conundrum, you know, or it's something I'm trying to narrow down with Michael Hill, who's the new hardware, I guess, OCP person, who's kind of
Depending on the scope, right? We have made exceptions in the server project for incremental contributions. If it was presented in the MHS public meeting, then depending on what it is that's being contributed, we can make an exception and just click accept on the server project presentation requirement of the process.
okay. Yeah, I mean it's just the tool. I mean it's for packaging through EPROMs. So it's kind of
Yeah.
a yeah. It's like, does it need to go to server? It's really more applicable to MHS, for the most part. So
Right. Right. Yeah, I
so
think we can make an exception for that.
okay, cool. So I'll ask Brian to put it on the next MHS agenda, and I'll just present the same thing I presented on Thursday, um, which I put the replay out, already. It's on the. I was going to talk about that in a second, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, we thanks for. I think we'll just go ahead and get started. We have enough folks. If until guys show up, hopefully in the next few minutes or so. Um, yeah, we can just go ahead and get started. Just kind of. All right. Yeah. So I sent out. Yeah. So this was a question about the poll I sent out. So that Brian Asnez had asked if he just wanted to make sure that there was a vote on the whether we put just a link to the location in GitHub from the MHS wiki, just saying it's a contribution, for anybody to, it's already publicly out there. So it's kind of okay, it's just a link. So, but yeah, if you get a chance, I'll show you the poll in a second here. But yeah, it would just be on the somewhere in the wiki. I'm not sure exactly which spot, but I'll go ahead and share my screen now. All right, so I sent out this poll. It's basically yes, no, or maybe. But essentially, the fruit packaging tool is here. Just take a look at it. And like I said, the replay is on the. It's on. Yeah. Replay is here. It's in the recordings on the Google Drive. You can take a look. That was from last Thursday. So hopefully you'll take a look at that. Yeah, I mean, it'd just basically be, I guess, someplace here, but these show specs. That inactive. Maybe this just has specs, and it does. I know there was some other contributions, section or page or something. I don't know if that's, if that's there. Oops, I guess I didn't want to go to that. Okay, well, yeah, it's unclear if it's it would show up. This shows specs, but an inactive docs. I don't know if there's a different wiki page for other contributions. I would think so. I don't know, Jeff. Do you know?
So that'd be a question for Brian.
Okay, yeah, I'll work through that. We'll figure out where that is. I mean, I remember seeing there was another. Maybe it's not. Yeah, this may not be under designs and specs. Maybe it's just under MHS. Let's see if that. Okay, yeah, there's this. This shows slides and other things. Marketplace entries. Maybe it's in the marketplace. I just need to. I need to work through that with Brian and say where should this go? I mean, because I saw there were other contributions in in a different link or different sections in the wiki. So I just need to work through that. All right. Well, yeah. So that's the poll. Last meeting we started talking about the webinar and kind of had a debrief. And started talking about trying to get finishing up the 0.7 scope, and there were a couple things we had a discussion about. So the schedule. Actually, I'm gonna just kind of combine talking about the schedule and the webinar. So I did get some correspondence back with Michael Hill and one of the other folks. And one of the things I overlooked was that the 11th was a holiday. It's Veterans Day, so they said it'd be better to give them a little more time to get all this organized. And I kind of agree. So we'll make it the 18th, and they said either the 2nd or the 9th. I said we'll talk about whether we think the 2nd is better, or if the 9th is better for the webinar for the FPGA. I mean, I like the 2nd because it's not too far into December, but I do understand it's right after Thanksgiving. So, there's pros and cons. But I'm worried that if it's the 9th, it's going to get too close to the holidays. So I don't know. Just want to ask what everybody's opinion is. That do we want to keep it on the 2nd, or do we think the 9th is better, or some other date? In that first week of December or second week. really probably don't want to do too late into the second week. So yeah, anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah, my opinion is earlier is better if it's in December.
Does everybody else agree? Do you want to shoot for the second?
I would second that for the second. Let's
Second for
do
the
it.
second.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
great.
the second is fine. I would avoid that Monday the first, just if anybody's
Yeah,
traveling back from Thanksgiving. But at least if
right.
anybody's traveling that week, wants to avoid that Sunday after Thanksgiving, we're traveling or traveling on Monday. At least give them that
Yeah.
Monday and do it on the second.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll confirm for the second. So yeah, this gives us a bit more time on the slides. And I have been working on them. I think I just need yet one more week, or probably less than a week, but early next week. I'll put them up there, and then next week we can talk about dividing out some of the slide sections into people polishing and improving the content. But I would like to ask for some volunteers for. I think 3 speakers is good. Unless there's a whole lot of folks who want to talk or speak in the webinar, but I think 3 speakers, because doing an hour and a half of content for one person is going to be pretty tiring. I mean, I've done that before, but it is pretty tiring. So I asking for volunteers of anybody else who wants to speak during the webinar. You don't have to answer me today, but think about it and let me know. Certainly by next week, I'd like to nail down who's going to be speaking, aside from myself. So, but yeah. So slides wise, still working on it. I've been building out the content. I will go through it next week. It's definitely it's improving. I'm kind of looking at the problem statement, and I took some of what Todd you had. I think I'm going to massage it a bit, so not necessarily have all the same slides that you had from the summit, but I think some of this is good content. Maybe kind of do a couple slides instead of a whole build, just because there is so much content here. And in fact, I probably may do more of that in the Free Discovery Boot webinar versus this one. Keep it a little bit more. If I can get it down to one slide, I'm going to try to do that. Just say, well, this is a recap of the problem statement that we talked about on the 18th. So, and some of the overview. I want to try to keep that briefer, if possible, and defer back to look at the replay for the webinar. And then really spend more time on, the FPGA. I've got it divided up a bit here, but there is a lot. Interfaces, memory map, the IP blocks are quite, and that's where I'm kind of filling out at least an initial version of it from some of the diagrams from the spec. But we'll definitely start handing out sections next week to say, hey, let's please review it and improve your sections. And certainly like the FPGA JSON, I expect I'm going to take that. And then some of these other ones. So it's getting there. Like I said, I'll have it ready for us to divide up next week. Any comments, or I'll just move on from the webinar.
I guess my question is, do we have a view of attendees yet? Like,
No,
we talked about it in OCP, but how do we get the word out to the community?
Yeah. So that was my engaging with Michael Schill from OCP. He's the I don't remember what his official title is, but he's kind of in a CTO-esque role. I mean, I guess with a hardware focus. And he's the one who's helping with getting the it'll be actually it'll be on the, what did he say was the on the 6th. He said it would be sent out the whole thing here on actually can't remember what.
I don't need to. I mean, I don't need you to
Yeah,
educate me. You got it. You're saying we're working with Michael, and he's got some ways to get the word out via the mailing list. Yeah. Okay.
He's gonna get the word out. He's the guy.
Yeah. All right.
And
Perfect.
he said he's gonna get that, start getting it set up. He said this afternoon. He just, I said I'd give him an answer on whether it's 2nd or the 9th. So now that I have an answer, he's gonna, he's gonna get the word out, and I will definitely ask him about how do we know who is, signed up for it or what the attendance will be. But certainly if it's coming from from an official OCP channel, it'll get out. It'll be advertised, and I think he mentioned something about on the 6th, a public meeting. Certainly, we want to, in our the next, I think the next MHS public meeting. I can't remember if that's what date that is. I think that is. Unless it got canceled, I can't remember. Looks like that's the 19th, so that's already passed the first one. I thought, I guess they didn't. Did they not have one last? Yeah, because it was canceled for Summit. So, it'll be sent out on the reflector for Brian, and I guess for MHS and Jeff, if you can send it out on the server reflector once it's officially broadcast by OCP, we can sort of extra reminder, put it on the various reflectors.
Yep, we can do that. I would think Michael would send it to, public.all.
Yeah, I think so. We can just add it as an extra, hey, in case you didn't see this type of thing, for people who are maybe not paying as much attention to public.all, they're paying more attention to MHS or server, they can see that there as well, and then hope for the best, kind of idea there.
Yeah, can certainly help advertise.
All right, cool. Okay, well, yeah, so hopefully that'll be received well, and we'll get a lot of folks attending. And yeah, so I think just moving on, unless there's any other questions or comments about the webinar, is the 0.7 scope. I think we were pretty much final with that, as far as what we had, the tracker. I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at this further. I'll just kind of walk back through it, and just just want to say, well, this is what we think we need to do for 0.7. If other things come up, we can always add to it. But a lot of it is just, it's a big chunk of just review what we've got. Are we happy with everything? Because we really want the 0.7 to be something that's solid, that people can implement towards. So a lot of what review what we already have. And then we had there were some sections that we said, let's go off, hold off on, we want to get this 0.5 out. We just really want to, get it there in time for the summit. So like the CSR definition for some of these other IP blocks, that was sort of other ones on the list we needed to finish up. There were some other sections that we, that had some initial verbiage in it, but we didn't really focus on in the 0.5, like the security considerations, attestation, etc. So let's finish the definition, and we may decide that we don't need to put too much there. We've already got plenty, or we may decide, okay, there may be some details that we need to, address or discuss, in these particular areas. Some things I know, like, SPDM is still, I guess, trying to work through, and their post-quantum encryption or post-quantum PQC cryptography, guidance and the algorithms, etc. Maybe that's something we can point to, if by the time we get closer to the releasing 0.7, that's something that they've already got in the SPDM spec. Maybe there's some other things we can add in there to address some other security concerns. Some of the image requirements probably just need to go back through and make sure that we have that solid. If there's additional pathways to get to the image while the FPGA is in reset, other than JTAG, but certainly want to talk about them as options. There's general requirements. That's pretty much a catch-all. Just need to look at these sections, the customization, OEM extension. These are kind of similar. May not even need to be at separate sections, honestly. Yeah, I already talked about the JTAG image access. So some things we need to finish: definitions, LED block, general use, the CSRs there. One of the things that came up, but we decided to punt to 0.7 with the host access, and I think to me that's something that's a bit more meaty that we need to sort of address. Something I wanted to kind of talk about, at least get the juices flowing on today. We've been talking about it internally with HP and thinking about putting together at least an initial proposal. But if other people have other proposals for host access, please bring them to the table. We're not we don't need to, it doesn't just have to be HP's proposal, and maybe we can combine, proposals to create the best version of it. So definitely, looking for people to come up with, if they have a proposal for the host access to the FPGA. One of the other things is the peripheral, PLD scope extension. That's something I, want to have at least a write-up on and a proposal on that. I think, there's some IP blocks that are peripheral specific, like the target. There's potentially some other ones that are peripheral specific. I think we all decided to let's try to just combine it into the same spec for now. If it's just an empty target and maybe one other IP block, and then leverage everything else, rather than creating yet another spec. So we could make it, HPM, FPGA, and peripheral PLD spec, as a more inclusive spec. So we talked about that last time. So that's something I, wanted to at least write up some thoughts on an initial proposal, and then bring that to the table. But if other people have some ideas about the peripheral PLD, what would be in there, and want to bring a proposal to the table, sure, yeah, more than happy to. And then kind of once you sort of have the peripheral PLD scope, once you've extended it, well, then coming up with a JSON file for that, that would be sort of the next step. Maybe a JSON file for a simple riser, CPLD, maybe a backplane, or even a PDB CPLD for a sort of bare bones, MVP kind of versions of these things. And then, finally, we need to walk through and understand what as we're going through each one of these sections, make sure that we add error paths, add paths, and any guidance around how to handle errors if we think we need to provide some guidance. That's something I need to add in the schedule. But the idea is let's ensure we have that in there, and hopefully we'll get some good industry feedback, and they will be able to, provide any other, things that we maybe want to add to the scope or adjust things accordingly. Certainly hope that we get a lot of attendance at the webinar. So yeah, this is the scope. Any thoughts? Anything missing? Anything we need to add there or adjust? Okay, well, like I said, this is out on the tracker. Take a look if something comes to mind and you're not sure, just go ahead and either you can add it in with a comment saying, hey, I'm not sure if this should be added or not, but please let's address it if if it needs to be in the scope. I mean, I kind of broke down some tasks, so I'll continue to do that. you know, that as we go through each area, you know, we can check off the, you know, the tasks, you know, as we address them in each, when we meet to discuss those particular items. But, you know, I'll probably add some more things in there. So that's pretty much the scope discussion. And you know, if there's any, stop me if you have any other thoughts or anything you want to add to it. So back to this agenda. So you know, I don't have anything to look at right yet, but if there's any, you know, I can take some notes. Does anybody want to, you know, kick off, you know, the host access to the FPGA discussion, even though we don't have a diagram or anything to talk through? I'll take some notes, and then as we're putting together a diagram, you know, over the next week, we'll bring it to the table next week. But you know, I guess, you know, we had some thoughts internally within HP. Andrew, I don't know, what do you want to mention anything now, or do you think we should just wait until we have the diagram and the couple, you know, little?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to share quite yet.
All right. Anybody have any comments or thoughts on the host access? You know, something that we can, you know, think about as we're trying to put together a proposal or the diagrams.
So for the, yeah, just to clarify, so for the host access, we want to we try to clarify just the registers that are like the interface between the host and the BMC, right, by the FPGA.
Yeah.
Or because I think the physical interface could be anything, right? But I think it's mainly the data or register set that's going to be in the FPGA that's accessible either by the host or the BMC.
Yeah, right. It's the registers, the data.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, we could state it could be anything. And I think the main thing is ensuring that, you know, and this would be something that'd be in the JSON file. The HPM actually indicates which interface the host can use for access to FPGA. Because you already know, you know, I mean, the BMC to FPGA, that we already have, you know, we already have that in the JSON file, but we do need to have a, you know, we need to indicate which interface the host can access to the because it has to be advertised somehow, right? I mean, if you don't have
but I suppose it's, but how critical is, because that's kind of very tightly coupled to the FPGA anyway. So whatever interface it uses, as long as, I mean, because the main thing that we kind of focus on here is the interoperability between the BMC and the platform, right?
Well, yeah. It's more of a question is there, you know, you know, it could be a situation where the BMC learns about which interface the host has access to the FPGA, so that if it needs to provide that to BIOS during the boot process, you know, for discovery purposes, it could do that. It could say, hey, this is your interface that you have if you want to talk to the FPGA. And it may be also a, you know, here's how you learn about what, you know, and kind of presumably, since it's the HPM and the you know, but it'd be great if there was some, you know, discovery process way that, you know, the BIOS can learn about, well, here's the interface, and I'm also told, you know, here's how I, you know, the location of registers or things like that. Maybe there's some, you know, OEM registers beyond the spec. You know, maybe there's some things that it can learn, and that may be something that it can just learn through querying that space. So that's something we get to decide is it a, you know, how much do you need to tell, does a BIOS need to discover versus, you know, you have to have as a priori, and you know, I ideally it'd be
I think this is something that's used very early on in the boot up. So
yeah, I would think so.
A BIOS would need to have this like hard code or coded into it. as opposed to
Potentially, yeah, potentially. So that's a good, I don't know. I mean, at what point in the boot process is there that, a query, but a conversation between the BMC and bias as to, hey, this is what I've discovered. Here's your information. Or is it just no, we got to have it so early, even before that conversation happens? That's a good question, and I think that's part of that's a something to ask the bias folks, and specifically, like, is OBMF guys covering something like that? I mean, what would be, how early do you need to access the FPGA if you're the bias? And then two is, can you wait until you get the discovery information from the BMC, or is it something you have to hard code? I mean, those are the different options there. So I think that,
yeah, you're asking all the right questions. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. I think that's a good question, to the OBMF folks. And we're kind of trying to get more engaged with them, so I need to ping them on that. I mean, I don't know if you've had a chance. They've got some specs out there publicly now. I've kind of taken a look at it. I haven't dug deeply into it. So I think there's some big questions that probably that those specs don't address. They kind of address sort of what's going to be riding on top of, they wanted to have something riding on MCTP, and they wanted to have another, I know that they're doing something. They have some sort of proposal. Well, I guess I can't talk about it. It's a DMTF thing, but anyway, the point is that there are some public documents out there, but there's still some open questions about, what it is that, beyond what they expect, which seems to be, after a bunch of things have already been set up, like, the early, physical interfaces have already been set up. Let me see if I can find where they have but it's they also have a a presentation. They've got two out there, but they had the one from the recent summit and the one from the back in May. So I recommend looking at that. Those particular those particular here it is. So they're already pretty far along, which I was surprised that their specs were at 0.7. I thought they were going to be not quite that far along, but that's okay. We can figure it out. But I need to ping them again. We'll do that here. I'll copy it in the chat. Kind of what they talk about these this interface consolidation protocol. Let's see if find a picture of it. Let's just go to the PDF, I guess. All right. Well, being slow. It's rendering it. Okay. Well, yeah. They have a diagram here, and I was going to try to find the diagram. Well, should have just there. They're kind of already, they're pretty much saying this is already on top of some physical interfaces like USB or I2C, etc. And they're riding over MCTP, so it's basically they sort of use MMIO just to channelize these different or traditional legacy interfaces. So legacy, like the UART, virtual wires, etc. So that's what they're, they're talking about. To me, it seems like this is something that's happening, between, the bias and BMC firmware. There's really a communications between the two is what I see. It's not, so if this has to be sort of built up before you have communications between the two, it may, I don't know, maybe it's something we need to say, sort of two parts. One is the, the, if you have to hard code, here's what you do. And then two is if you are okay until you can have the BMC bias communications. So it's kind of, I see it as kind of two paths. And then maybe this is you have it in JSON. And it's still good for the BMC to know what interface that the bias is going to use. But if it's hard coded, it's maybe some config file or something that says, okay, this is what you have to build into your bias, is some config file that says this has got, here's the interface you're using, and here's how you access it. And maybe that's that. It just depends on, and there's the question is how much do we want to teach versus ideally point to some other spec. So and then we spend the most time talking about defining CSRs and content and content data and process of extensibility into OEM. Yeah, so I think that's probably pretty good. Anyway, so I definitely recommend taking a look at this. It's also really needed for understanding the boot portion of the Fru Discovery boot spec. Trying to understand, and I need to have conversations with these guys about, how can I hand off, how can we, how can what we're doing hand off to them in a way so that it's complementary. And to me, this seems like it's very complementary. I just need to understand, is it what do we need to do to describe that this will be, because you do need to know, what, the thing I don't understand here is how do you know how does the bias know to choose which one, well, I guess if it's USB, it's still saying it can be ICMP over MCDP. I don't know that there's some questions I have, and I just need to send it to them and say, hey, really do need to understand how do we hand this off so it can be used, because there's a lot of internal trying to understand, we're trying to understand it. So anyway, so anybody, if you have any thoughts, comments, etc. On this versus the basically if you have any thoughts on anything else that should be in the this particular, I was just taking some notes here, but if you have any thoughts on what should be in that the CSRs or the data, let me know. And if you don't have any today, but you think of something, then certainly send me a note or put something in the the reflector. There's a way to do it, but yeah, and pull it together for next week, and we can have that conversation. Let's see. Other than that, any other thoughts? I don't have anything more on the on the host access yet. All right. Well, we'll pivot here. You know, what did I have in the agenda? You know, we can look at so it looks like we still have time if we want to spend a little time just kind of looking at some of the tracker items. You know, maybe we can knock out a couple. They've been kind of on the to-do list. The ARs. So I'm gonna kind of, you know, so it may end up wanting to, you know, organize these by, you know, like type question, type like into certain areas like SGPIO. It makes sense to talk about it when we get, you know, back to talking about SGPIO. So I'm not even sure we don't necessarily need a payload template spreadsheet. One of the things, and I'm going to show it here, and I've been working on this tool for the FPGA JSON. I may have just show you that I've been working on what I'm calling is a requirements template, and that's what's used to create an initial version of the JSON file. Let me pull that up here. And what we're, you know, thinking of using it for, you know, this creates, you know, I've been working on a Python script to take the contents and build out, and I didn't have this on the agenda today, but I'm just going to mention this, you know, this, you would take this initial, you know, what I call a requirements template, and that would be used to create that initial JSON file, and you basically use that plus, you know, all the things that you get out of the image and the, you know, the RTL, or if you need to parse the RTL, or, you know, the you know, any of the build artifacts. You know, hopefully the idea would be that you'd have a final pass of the script at the end that would take the initial version of that JSON file plus all those other things and then create the final one. So that it automates the whole process and you don't have to do any of this by hand, because nobody would want to do that. But the idea here is, you know, and this is just an example of a couple. I you know, could put a lot more for the example to make it a little bit more real world, but the idea is that in this template you would put whatever GPIOs that you want to, you know, have described on that SGPIO bus. So that would be the idea is, you know, you wouldn't have a payload template, because we the payload is the GPIOs. So you know, this particular item, you know, you just wouldn't even need it, because you just go to that spreadsheet, you fill out that spreadsheet, and you get a JSON file. But you know, so I'm not sure. I think to me the answer of this one is just fill out that spreadsheet. There you go. But you know, I don't know if there's anybody have any thoughts. Do you need a different spreadsheet, or you know, or something more, something else? I mean, because you know, that's the base template. The base payload is you have the discovery process, and you know, it passes versions and a couple other minor things, and you know, like an OEM number or whatever, or value, and then you just go to the active phase, which is GPIOs. Now, if you decide you want to do a much more complicated payload, I think that's not taught in the spec. So I don't, you know, that would be an OEM specific, you know, vendor specific payload with its own version and its own special thing. And I don't think we need to provide that, you know, any other, you know, here's how you create more complicated payloads. Like I don't think we're going to do that. So are we kind of good with just saying, let's just use, you know, and I'll eventually put this up on the Google Drive and say, hey, this is an input that's going to be used for the FPGA JSON tool that you will also get to use as the template for your GPIOs. You know, the same thing. Also, LTPI, GPIOs. It has, you know, this whole template I'm building out, this requirement template, and it just has all these different sections here. And this gives you sort of enough of a, it's like it's annoying, it's little, enough of a starting point, you know, registers, register maps, the memory map, the whole thing, all the different buses. And so I've got it to where it will parse this out and create a JSON file from it. So that'll be a demo in a couple weeks or so. There's some more polish that I want to do on it. But suffice to say, you know, are we good that this is good enough of a template? Is I can't see anything else. Yeah, I'll let you. Yeah. Anybody have thoughts? Yeah, I mean, are we good enough to close this one and say that that spreadsheet is a good enough template for putting your SGPIO GPIOs?
Yeah, I think so.
I second that.
All right, great. Let's see. All right. Just closed. All right. Yeah. So hopefully, you know, when I demo that, you know, everybody will see that it'll be a useful tool. We think it's, you know, you know, it's a good, an easy way to create the initial requirements for your FPGA. I think some of these other ones, external IP block. So this is the one we're actually kind of discussing. So, you know, this is, you know, this is the host to FPGA access. You know, okay. Design map templates for CSR. So it's kind of the same thing. I mean, so you know, the regions are here, and then the registers. These are the register maps within each region, and then you can put whatever, you know, you want. I mean, this basically mirrors the you know, the JSON file, you know, what's in the JSON file. And then you can specify individual registers and individual bit fields within those registers. Excuse me. So, so you kind of have, that kind of gives you a, you know, the CSRs that you want to specify in advance. You know, you may have other CSRs that aren't specified in that file that just come from your RTL that you populate. You know, that, you know, additional ones. I mean, that's something I just need to understand. Is there, you know, or is it better to just say, well, all, you know, everything that I want the BNC to know about is in this spreadsheet. You know, that's kind of the thing to say. You know, as far as, you know, there's some dots that need to be connected when you get the RTL, because it's not going to be in the spreadsheet. It's going to be from, you know, building the image. But there are others that, you know, you could specify everything here that you want to, and that's the quote unquote, you know, template for the CSRs. I don't know if there needs to be yet another like spreadsheet or some other tool that provides a CSR quote unquote template. I don't know. I mean, does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or should there be some other, you know, file that you fill out? Or do you think kind of this is good enough? You know, it's just the regions, region maps, registers. Um, Anybody have any thoughts on that? Or I guess the question is kind of like the same thing with this. Is that what I just showed you good enough for a design map template for CSRs, or is there something else you think needs to be created?
Seems to be pretty generic and flexible, so I wouldn't have anything to add.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, or if not, then Well, let's do this. We'll go ahead and I'll say this is use the same thing, and if later on we think no, we need to add some other template or something else, then we can open up a new one. Yeah, and it basically it should give the BMC what it needs. Because at the end of the day, we have to create a JSON file that's complete enough to give the BMC enough information to know where are the different registers, which ones are associated with which IP blocks, and does it follow a given spec and things like that, and that's kind of what this the register maps do. I mean, it basically says this one follows the FPGA spec, this one follows an LTPI spec. If there's some other ones here, and the intention is that the BMC would have the modules necessary to support, if it supports plug and play, then it would have the modules necessary for that particular IP block. And if there's OEM or any vendor defined modules, then that would have to be described in the FPGA spec, and that may not even come from this. It may have a placeholder that says OEM vendor defined, section 1, 2, blah blah blah. Maybe region. I only have a few here, but maybe there's OEM or somebody specific this and that and the other thing, and then you look at the register map and it says, okay, I provided a spec for this particular vendor defined set of registers, provided it has that and it's got the module to support that, then it can support that vendor defined thing. But everything else should either be probably just the FPGA spec, and that's probably what it'll be mostly, other than like this one is defined in the LTPI spec and we don't need to define it within the FPGA spec. So that's kind of the idea. We're trying to do that. So hopefully this is good enough and we don't need anything special. Now this one here, it's actually, you don't need a template for this because it's going to be the mapping between, the virtual wire framework will be pulled out of the RTL. I mean, or basically you don't need to do that because you'll know, okay, here are my LTPI GPIOs, here's my SGPI GPIOs. If you have anything else that needs to be, GPIOs connecting the dots, that would need to be something added into this template. So I think what I would do is, look at any other places where a specific needs to be called out in the PGA JSON template. But a lot of the things that are going to pop out of it are going to be, all right, that's fine. A lot of the things are just going to pop. The virtual wire mappings are going to pop, are going to come from the RTL. Instead, that's the connecting the dots between the, you know, those SGPI, you know, or GPIOs that are, you know, externally, you know, the and then, you know, internal signaling. So so at this point it's not you know, so this is I'm not closing it. I just need to take a look at, is there something else that needs to go in this, in here? You know, these are the things that I kind of off, you know, I you know, we're easier to just say, okay, I know I need something for SGPIO, I need to see something about LTPI, but it might be a generic GPIO. And actually I think I'll add that as another sheet, you know, just GPIO that you're saying up front. I know I need to connect up these GPIOs that are just on, you know, signals that are on the FPGA. I know I need them. I just don't know where they're going to be. You know, I may not have a specific idea up front of where they're going to be physically connected. That's likely to be something happening during the build process when you get an input from the HPM. You know, whatever, you know, here's the pin list, and the HPM is dictating the pin list because these are the pins that they need to, or there's some, you know, iterative process there where it's optimizing the, you know, between the layout, you know, both the layout of the board and the layout of the FPGA. So to me, that seems like I know what GPIOs I want, I just don't know where they're going to land, you know, physically. So I think there's another tab here that I'm missing. And so I need to add that in. But add in the general, you know, physical, you know, GPIO list that I need in the template. So I think that's a to do here for me. I don't know why this seems like a duplicate of that. This has got to be it. It says documentation, but these two things seem like they're duplicates. I'm just kind of bumping past this. Anyway, so this is something to revisit once, you know, we show that, hey, this is how the you get that, you know, the JSON file gets that virtual wire section. And this seems like, you know, it seems like a duplicate. Anyway, no question. Post tax, yes, 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 and when we are discussing this, it is part of the scope. I think we can close this one. Yeah, because definitely that's something we're gonna do. Yeah, these other ones, pesty, and I'm kind of running through this quickly. I guess, you know, stop me if you have questions. I think this is not. I don't even know why this should be in this particular. You know, this should be in the other. This should be in the other meeting, but really, I think that's kind of dangerous. You know. Yeah. I know, I'm not sure why this, you know, I think that requires an SCM spec, you know, should be in other meeting. Uh, that one. I don't know, any thoughts here? I don't think I mean, this is, you know, I2C 0 is necessary for the free EEPROM, you know, you have to get to that, you know, that's the starting point. I don't think we should change that. Otherwise, now you're changing the SCM spec. So I'll pull this in the other meeting, but yeah. Everybody agree? Everybody's dropping. Okay, well, I think yeah, I'll do that. You know, we got through a few of these items. You know, hopefully we do a little bit each time, and we close some things out. You know, certainly the ones that are related to the particular area we're talking about will pull up. But anyway, well, thanks everybody. It's 1 o'clock here, my time, top of the hour. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk again next time.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.